Okay, welcome. All right, it's 3 o'clock on Wednesday, and it's time for Max's demo. Thanks for coming, everybody. I hope you enjoy. And feel free to ask him questions directly, or I can also screen questions for that. We're trying a new microphone today, so feedback if it's better for you, and any tech stuff as usual.
Awesome. Yeah, we're progressing in leaps and bounds here, I hope. When we tried the mic last time, it was very crisp, but we had those echo issues. Hopefully we've ironed those out. But yeah, definitely let us know if you can hear properly or if it's too loud, any of that. And I guess I'll just start out with any general questions you have for me right off the bat, from things that I covered last class or things that I missed.
Max, are you going to cover
open up the floor to you guys.
Are you going to cover the sodium silicate? It's Barb.
Hey, Barb. I think I may. I just put out a post maybe an hour ago. I think I may push that until Monday, just because I still have some wet work, fundamental stuff that I want to cover, and that is a. We can spend a fair amount of time talking about sodium silicate and Epsom salts. And that'll be a segue from wet work into slips, and then that'll lead right into glazing. So sorry to...
oh, wait. No problem.
Are we going to do wheel work today? Are you going to demonstrate wheel work?
A touch of thrown forms, like inserts that I'm using, but nothing on the wheel per se. Although if you have anything specific, I'm happy to hop on there and
well, I'm very interested in seeing how you do those forms in the wheel. This is actually why I took the class. So I know that, part of your work is hand-built, but I know also that you do some of your large torus forms are in the wheel, and I will love for you to demonstrate how you do them.
Definitely, yeah. So I, let's see if you can see behind me. I have I threw a number of these yesterday, and I have some that are sort of half finished, but I can demonstrate how I throw the basic form. Let's see, I'll just show you some of the in-progress ones now. That's okay, I think later I'll just bring one of these out. But this is, I'm throwing a pretty simple globular, semi-spherical, ovoid form. And then I'll do a demo of the inserts, the thrown inserts. But they're all like pre-thrown, but I can hop on the wheel and do a quick throwing demo of those as well as needed.
Max, are you working on a kiln shelf?
Oh, no, this is just a piece of wood with canvas over it. Yeah, some people do that, if you are really making something super delicate and you won't have an opportunity to pick it up, or it's so fragile that if you pick it up, you'll break it. I know some people do that. You can also work directly on drywall, which can be fired. Check with ceramic staff before you do that, because there are some fumes and off-gassing released. But you can fire drywall pieces on drywall. The drywall basically disintegrates, but it leaves enough structure that you can, the piece won't fall over if it's fired on disintegrating drywall.
Max, that toroid beginning, how much did that weigh?
Oh, I have to admit, I never ever weigh my clay when I throw. I throw them pretty thickly so that they can sort of support themselves. And I leave a lot to trim away. So the bottom, that sort of edge there, might be about that thick. Again, they're non-functional things. The only things that I really throw thin are things that are going to be picked up, like mugs or pitchers of the functional variety, not like the mugs that I demoed earlier.
I said it's 5 to 6 pounds.
Yeah.
Well, some work of yours, Max, like where you have these like flabby like things, those probably are thin, right?
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm just going to turn, is it this one?
There's some work like of yours where there is more like waves, like flabby, like those, are they thin?
Those, I coil them thick, and then in the process of like stretching them out and creating the proto folds before they're squished, in the process of stretching them out, they get fairly thin.
I see.
And you'll see if you do it yourself, the quality of the wrinkle does change. Like if they're really thick, you can get these nice beefy folds, and if they're really thin, they'll actually crinkle in on themselves and weak points and things like that. So you can get like a fine, more of like a silk sort of, you know, effect. Silk has like much finer wrinkles than like a canvas wrinkle might. So you can play around with thickness and the different effects that those give. But you can certainly, you know, you can make those folds at any thickness really, you know, thick or thin. They just take a little bit of orienting to like how delicate a thin wall would be versus how robust and kind of forgiving a thick wall might be. Cool. Any other questions right off the bat? I'll just sort of outline what I'm going to do today. I posted some images in the Facebook group about an hour ago of some fancy teacup handle, one of those double handles, and a vase by Josh Deweese with some other handles. So we're going to cover handles today. And then I also included an image of Matt Waddell's work. If you're not familiar with him, I highly recommend keeping an eye on him. He's really kind of one of these rock star ceramists these days, working on a monumental scale. And I include him because he really has an important way to think about hand building. You know, I've just been demoing coil building thus far, but you can really do like more modulated hand building. You don't have to make these monolithic forms. He builds with multiple forms, and so I'll just jump right into that demo.
Let's see you right there.
Why do you have it on both?
I like the big screen, but this has the volume, and they can hear me less.
Guys, so this is a little flower pot that I made last year when I was in Mendocino. So this is my foray, one of my forays into a sort of Matt Waddellian pedal building. This part was thrown on the wheel, and then I'll demo how I make these pedals right now. But it's just a completely different way of building up form than just using coils. And it's frankly really fun and fairly straightforward. And you can go about it in a number of ways. Like the images that I showed you, you'll see he's making these monumental forms, like coiling huge 5-foot coils and then draping them over, and then like interweaving these monstrous coils with sort of open forms. So we'll do more wheel thrown inserts. I can demo some throwing as well, one of those globular forms, handle pulling techniques, attachments, and appendages / other ways of building, which I'll do right now. So to make those pedals, I just roll a little ball in my hands, nice and easy, and then I just squish it into a sort of flattened but still round form. And if I want to, maybe I'll just like gently squish it so that one side, it has a little bit more directionality. Give you a better idea. So now it has sort of a side that's indented, a side that's concave, and a side that's convex. And I'll just go and add that right onto the top here. It's a really fun way of building. And then I'll do that again, another ball, squish, indent, if you look at Matt's work, he leaves a lot of his finger marks. It's really, really pinchy, evidently pinchy work, which honestly, most of the time, I kind of have problems. I don't know. I just don't get as much out of that kind of work. But the way Matt does it is just kind of, I don't know, on another level, I guess. Like making an 8-foot tall pinch pot is pretty amazing.
Matt also uses a different type of clay. He has a lot of paper in his clay.
Does indeed, yeah. He uses a lot of toilet paper in his clay. So we can talk. Paper clay is a pretty amazing thing. You know, the paper just burns out, so it's really quite useful in just the greenware wet work building stage. Paper fibers are fairly small. You can play with what kind of fiber you use, what kind of paper source. But like toilet paper breaks into these teeny fibers that intersperse evenly in the clay body. And they give you a bunch of different useful qualities. One of the most is it opens up the clay body, sort of like grog, but in a less gravelly manner. So there's kind of a capillary action. If you wet 2 pieces of paper clay, the water travels through those really long paper fibers, long compared to the size of the clay particles. So you'll get a stronger bond because the water will go further than it would with just non-papery clay. And it gives you a lot of strength as well because again, the paper fibers are so big comparatively. Like if you've ever had just a chunk of paper clay lying around, you can even crack it and it'll stay together because the paper fibers hang out in between in that void. Something fun to try out too. I mean, I think the cheapest and easiest way to do it is toilet paper and or cellulose insulation. Cellulose insulation is basically just recycled paper, so it's already kind of half broken up. But it's another thing where there really aren't rules. You know, you could just use get sawdust from a wood shop and toss a bunch of that in. It'll work just as well.
Nylon fibers.
Nylon fibers as well. A little more expensive, but really, you know, you can get nylon fibers that are like 9 inches long. The world is your oyster. They do take a little bit of. There's some other qualities like organic fibers, unlike nylon fibers, will mold and get rather stinky. So you really have to be conscious of using it. Sort of has an expiration date that most clay doesn't. And it really, you know, it'll smell pretty bad pretty quickly. Things to keep in mind, especially if you work in a community studio.
Yeah, we don't reclaim the paper clay here in our regular reclaim because sometimes it takes months to get it dried and through the pug mill. So we always ask people if they're using paper clay to reclaim it on their own.
It gums up certain machines too. Yeah, not without some issues of its own too. And that's another thing with all organic matter that you're burning out in a kiln. If you work in a communal studio, just let the technicians know because it will smell, and it's best to do that kind of stuff at night. So just like an update here, I'm getting down to the second layer, and I'm really attaching these pretty weakly. I'm just blending about the bottom third in with the base, and that's enough for them to stay attached and not really want to move at all. If I didn't like this, I could pull it off pretty easily, but for my purposes, it's stuck on there, and when I glaze it on there, it'll be completely attached.
Those petals you're attaching, Max, it has, some of them have like little cracks at the edges. Like, do you do any other? Those are, it's not needed.
You could, this is, yeah, so the clay I'm using is a reclaim, and it's especially groggy. Like this one, You can see at the point where it's been stretched the most has burst. Frankly, I'm not too worried about that. You can stretch it with a support on your hand a little more, and that'll give some compression on that other side so that it doesn't burst. For my purposes, I'm not too worried, especially because these pieces you can glaze like crazy since there's so much surface area. So I'll probably go for a thicker glaze application, and that'll cover up all those little cosmetic features. And again, I'm starting with a cylindrical, simple coiled form, but you can just build with these on their own. You don't have to do this petal form. You can make just a bunch of coils and work them in another way, whatever module you like. But I tend to, especially since I've been in California, I made these in Mendocino. And I was just really drawn to all the huge, beefy, kind of alien succulents that were all spread out in the garden there. Found them really kind of wildly attractive. So I made a series of these flower pots. It's just a fun way of building. You can build up a lot of mass really quickly and totally transform a form rapidly as well. And I'll probably try and start angling them, having them blossom out a little bit more. Right now they're pretty vertical, but we'll try and get some motion in there.
Do these flower pots have openings in them?
They do. So this one, it's kind of a torus-like thing where I actually blended the first layer, which I didn't do here. So it kind of has that orifice-like thing, but it goes all the way down to functional flower pot. I have to say, they actually look fantastic and absurd with single flowers sort of blossoming out of there. There's this nice transition point that the petals give. I thought we would try. What else? Yeah, again, I'm not scratching or attaching. The clay is pretty wet on both sides, wet enough that I'm not too worried about these separating. If you want to, you can certainly lacerate the cylindrical form underneath or wet it. Sometimes, if I'm using larger petals that won't support themselves, if I have a petal that's going to extend a fair amount, I would wait for them to stiffen up. Maybe I would make a big pile of petals on the side and let them stiffen up for anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours, so they would have the rigidity and not want to pull themselves down and separate. Ruth, have you seen any of Matt's shows, or you're familiar with his work?
Yes, I'm familiar with his work, and I like his work, and I'm trying to get him to come and teach here. But I'm curious, and excuse me if I'm bold, but
Please,
your
please.
work have very little to do with Matt's work.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder, your work is exceptional, and it's different than much of the work that we have seen. And I wonder why not spending most of your time showing us what you are the best known for. Because really, pinching pots is something that we can learn from YouTube. And anyway, that's my way of looking, I looked at your the recording of your presentation showing the toroids and the cups, and I'm fascinated by your work, and I really would like to know more about how you do that part. So
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's excellent feedback, frankly. Yeah, I'm definitely doing some fundamental things. A lot of the simple techniques that I've introduced are really, like all of my work is pretty simple from a construction standpoint. Some things, I really can't get into, like having a class on mixing plastics and solvents, and spraying things gets a little complicated. But we'll get into some of the other techniques. Like I'm gonna introduce the handle pulling, which is just a good thing, even for you hand builders. Learn how to pull a handle, like these wheel thrower types. Like I believe you had posted an image of one of the fabric spheres, sort of a beige fabric sphere. And a lot of that is just a handle pulling technique that I use, but just pulled on a form. So taking these simple processes and applying them in kind of abnormal ways. So I'll just show you very quickly how I do that. I believe it was you who posted that photo, Ruth. Let's see. We can, if you want, we can also go spend some time in the gallery, and I can answer specific questions about specific pieces. If you have any, happy to do that.
I'm interested in technique, and again, your work is very unique, and so the 3 pictures that I put in Facebook, like the purple one, and it's not the cover that I like. I like to know, how did you come about that that form? And then you have a piece in your Instagram of Yagi Kazuo. It's reminiscent of Yagu Kazuo with the folds. I'm very interested in knowing, how do you achieve these forms? Because I've been trying folding clay for a long time, and I never come up with anything that is even similar to what you do. So yeah, so just seeing you, working and making some folds, it will go a long way for me to understand a little bit more about the process.
Definitely happy to. They're all like those folding demos from the first few classes is really the like it's just that technique applied elsewhere. I can do some like the purple piece that you showed is still doing that, like bellying things up from the inside and then squishing other areas, slowly working them out, and then doing a little bit more of an assertive squish once they're bellied properly. But that is an orientation issue. With that purple piece, you're folding a wall that's horizontal, versus like the flabby piece that you had posted afterwards is folding a wall that's vertical. So, those present different architectural challenges for sure. Like that purple piece, I have to make the walls, these walls totally set up so that they can handle me distorting things in that central area without them collapsing or warping or things like that. So that, yeah, just making sure that you have some architectural stability, but still enough water and plasticity in the clay to get away with that.
So seeing you make a piece like that for me will be actually a good way, and hopefully, the cameras being in places where we can see your fingers and so on. And also, I'm interested in knowing, how do you how do you scale towards the largest toroid forms, like the red one that you had in the gallery? And I know that you take for granted, like when you show that piece that you prepare that is in the back of you, ready to put the you take for granted. But I will I would love to see how you go about to making that form ready for the insert in the wheel. So
Definitely, we'll cover those. I have a bunch of unfinished ones behind me, and we'll get to one of those today. And if you want, I can do like the simple, throwing a spherical cylinder as well. Happy to do that. So here, this is in relation to that beige fabric piece that you had posted. That's sort of a swirling, kind of a proto-torus-like form. I had just gone to France and I fell in love with all this Baroque sculpture, like Bernini's portrait of King Louis the 16th or something like that, and he's totally windswept and everything is flowing and everything is curved. So I came back and I started doing fabric studies. And essentially the technique that I developed, so while we were talking, I just added in a couple just light coil additions here, sort of stalks coming from the leaves. Doesn't make too much sense. And then I'm just taking my sponge, and since the clay is wet, you can press in. This is kind of fun to use the camera. You can press in with my 2 fingers. So there's, as I press in, it's leaving a ridge in between them, which you can kind of see here. And it's also smoothing it out rather quickly.
Looks like romaine lettuce.
There are great industrial, like faux ceramic vegetables and whatnot. Very inspiring. With like beautiful china painted, pink edges and stuff. Yeah, no shortage of inspiration. So, and then, to emphasize that one ridge, I'll just use my 1 finger and dig in and create a canyon. Maybe I want to give this piece a little lift. So I'll take, my trusty wooden rib and I'll dig into the base there and have it lead.
So this is how you do all your faux fabric.
This is how I did that specific one. The drapery studies that are in the gallery right now are unfortunately a little bit more meticulous. Those are actually coiled simple forms and then carved the fabric, carved the folds. These are more free form, so just thinking about undulating surfaces definitely in a freer way. I could be a little bit less discerning. The drapery studies were really kind of clinical approach to form. These are just about fabric. And again, a wet sponge on these forms gives you nice, like highly detailed lines as well, just depending on where your fingers are. Whoa, oops. So now we have like this nice little bulge going up. And then I could emphasize, there's kind of a nice V shape happening here. And I'm going to go in and try and make that a little bit more dramatic. Just taking my tool and pressing down. And it's a little bit wet, so it's a little bit too sticky. I'll just clean that off. So now we have that little divot. Let's clean that up. Return to my sponge work. You can see, just like the cleanup demo from the last class, as I sponge this, the grog is coming to the surface, and that's just dandy. It's getting clean along the way. You can also see the grog in this clay is a lot larger, and that's another reason why, even though it's pretty darn wet, it's very stable. The more grog, the less plastic it'll be, and the less warpage you'll have at basically all stages of making, in the kiln and while it's wet. Seems like a little low point. Build that out. Or build that back in. Yeah, it's a strange thing. I mean, like trying to teach, I do make a wide variety of work, so it is hard to sort of focus on one thing. It is true that the toroids are probably what I'm most known for, or probably what I make the most of these days.
I can only go by what I saw on Instagram or elsewhere in the internet, because I don't know. I haven't been in any gallery where I saw your work, or so that's the only part that I know from your work, what you put on Instagram, really.
Definitely. No, totally understandable. Like the wheel throwing thing, I completely understand people like, what, you make cups? Because I really don't advertise those at all. They're just, when I go places, I do make a fair amount of pottery, although less here, just sort of bread and butter stuff, and throwing cups is always super relaxing. But it's been getting less and less, less and less attention as I've hopped around.
I think it's interesting to learn about your process through that like fundamental clay work lens, because it makes sense since that's, you know, something that you're like, that this work is actually built off of, are those
Completely.
like fundamentals of understanding clay, like the limits of the stretch, or
Just like water,
Right.
controlling water content. I feel like this, you know, a lifetime of work on something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it helps with every aspect of the process, knowing, just getting like an embodied knowledge, not an intellectual, like there's this much water, but being able to touch the clay and knowing how it will respond. And wheel work definitely helps with that, because you get, you have to understand how it's going to respond if you do another pull, if it's going to collapse, or if you can get away with it.
Can you pull the banding wheel back a little?
Oh,
So we can, the lighting's a little bit better from this camera to see
nice, yeah.
the undulation.
And so I'm going to take, go back to my favorite tool here. So another way to make the folds is just by carving them. So I just sort of push my tool in and then scrape to one side and try and create a line that way. And it's going pretty deep in there because I want a sharp indent. It's another nice thing about coiling thick is that you can get away with stabbing it pretty aggressively. And this will be pretty sloppy, but go back in and try and clean that up. So I'm making probably the deepest inserts down at the base, and then as I go, I'm just softening my approach and feathering them out more or less. Changing my angle as well. A lot of folds have a more of an S curve to them, so they'll start at one angle, and as they go up, they'll sort of twist. So you have to keep that twisting motion in mind And that makes pieces generally just more dynamic when you move around them and the curves change. They're a little bit more exciting and engaging as a three-dimensional work. One reason why I like these flower pots because they're so loose, I can kind of do anything I want. And I'm basically taking the edge of one of these petals, and I'll just try and pretend like that edge is more integral or more structural, just by pulling it out.
Do you have a vision for how this will look in the end? Like, can you describe that?
Honestly, not really. I basically just wanted to show you guys petal work really quickly. But it's fun. I mean, a good thing. I can, if we want, we can add some inserts, onto the side here. This can be our demo piece. I can add some handles to this. It'll be a monstrous hybrid. And just sort of gently working those curves. I'll clean up that edge. Just keep my tool at a 45-degree angle and press up against that edge. Give it a little lift. Smooth out that edge that I created. Yeah, it's always important, to move these things around and see what's happening. Yeah. It's already quite strange. Get a little more dramatic. So the tool will scrape clay away, but you can also just press inward and squish that clay in, so it'll stay pretty thick. If you carve stuff away, you could have like a really thin point in one area, and that could be structurally compromising.
Sorry, I'm really moving the camera a lot right now. Just trying to get it lower.
Yeah, I'll just focus on one area for the get that, like how to carve folds effectively. Because this is another to Ruth's question about that purple piece. One of the ways of avoiding some of the structural issues that you can have when you're trying to warp a vertical surface is just by going and carving them instead of doing the actual manual squishing. Because you can just coil it really thick on the top and have enough, well, not that thick, but like that thick, and make like just some light curves, and then work the edges by carving them. Get some nice crisp edges. Maybe I'll press in. I do try and keep the tools that I use pretty simple and straightforward. This is a really nice one for these fold works. It's like a slightly compliant, slightly bendable plastic piece. I'm not sure if I got this in China. It's a pretty standard modeling tool though. You can see that nice sharp edge is really useful for this sort of work. Because you can back to the side, camera two. Awesome.
The lighting is better from this angle, so
Yeah.
hopefully that's good.
It is, yeah. I don't know. I photograph a lot of my work. I don't know if you guys do that as well, but pay attention to the way lighting activates work. Like with wrinkles and folds and drapery, lighting it from the side catches all the ridges and keeps all the canyons nice and crisp. So, like when I document stuff, you want to choose the angle.
Light that you're working in is helpful too.
Truly, truly, truly. Yeah, there. You know, a lot of times when I work in a dim studio and the kiln shed or something is brightly lit, I'll take it in there and I'm like, oh my god, I missed all these horrible areas. Always nice to have a lamp on hand.
So Mark, this technique that you are using on this vase, is this the same technique that you use on like the fabricated sphere that you have in Instagram?
Yeah, yeah. More or less, especially the wet work with the sponge. You know, like adding, I have like this nice ridge, but to pull it out, I'll just slap on another coil, just another additive coil, and blend it. Same, you know, that same joinery technique, just make sure it's really well blended in there. Then I'll take my sponge, oops, and a fairly wet sponge as well. Not like damp, but it actually has some water in it. If I squeeze it, it'll, and you can just drag your sponge. You can get some of those nice crisp finger lines. Like that curve is all from my finger mediated with the sponge. Maybe I'll try and make it seem like that's going somewhere. I'll come from the other side, and again, twisting, thinking about that twisting line. So it like goes in at that angle, and as it moves, it ends up at the other angle. So entering straight on, and then just really slowly using the turntable to turn the work. That'll give you a nice dynamic curve. I hope that's translating right. And then suddenly, you know, my hand is facing the completely perpendicular. And so these, you know, these folds are fairly messy at the moment. There are a lot of tool marks and the like, but just some simple techniques can clean all those right up as well. So I have a slightly stiff brush here, and I'll just wet that. You don't have to wet it. You can keep it. Well, actually, I'd probably keep it wet. So you can kind of see there are still tool marks because I was hitting it step by step. And I'll just get rid of those really easily with a brush. Just sort of dig it in there. I like the bristly stiff brushes because they kind of act like teeny serrated ribs. They have enough strength in them to push around wet clay. So they'll wear down those tool marks. I'm just going in, digging it into the crevasse, and then working outer area where it was pulled. So now we have a fold that kind of looks like it just happened. Now that I have that there, it's actually very useful having having these videos. You can look at the side there from the front. Let me pull this side down. Kind of like how this element looks like it's squishing, like bulging outwards. Just read the trimming. Well, let's see. All right, so that's a good manual folding demo. What else do we have? We have some handles, handle pulling. And again, yeah, like the nice thing about making pots is that when you make a batch of mugs and you make a set of handles, you really do get a good feel for how wet clay responds and how you can pull one of those appendages. And then if you just take that process and put it onto a wall, exciting things will happen pretty quickly. I'm going to separate this fold into two. Just by digging in and now we have another a crease, a crinkle where these two walls become one. It's just with playing, playing with the form, and since it's lumpy to begin with, you can push in and kind of exaggerate some of those. So like, I like that this area is raised, and I'll just go in and dramatize that area that's raised by depressing the area around it. Little contrast. Nothing has to be heavy-handed. I'm moving like, 10 grains of sand or what have you per stroke, but it'll translate in the final piece. Maybe this is sitting a little bit too heavily. Dig in over there. I'm just stabbing in and pulling straight out at an angle. And as always, feel free jump in with questions about this or anything else. I'm happy to answer. This piece is actually growing on me pretty quick. With a big, cauliflower.
When you do this carving, do you kind of work around the whole form and dig in as you go around and around, or do you work on one side and then the next?
I try, like in an ideal world, I try and work it all from a rough point to a fine point really gradually. I'll like go and sketch out that area and go and sketch out another area and then get in there and really do the first pieces. But sometimes I just get carried away and one area looks like it really wants something to happen, and I'll just spend a fair amount of time there. I guess it's fairly. I work fairly chaotically. most of the time. But loosely it is, you know, everything really rough and sketched out, and then slowly working it to a point where it's refined.
Max, how does the feel when you use this metal tool compared to similar wooden tools feel?
The metal tool I like because it's really thin. You know, I can use this as a knife, whereas the wooden tools tend to have enough of a thickness that it'll displace more clay. Like when I jab it in, it'll squeeze some things out, and I won't get as fine of a line. It is worth mentioning that a lot of these really fine lines will get covered up with glaze. They'll fill with glaze. So, you know, you have to think about the way that your glaze, like the thickness of your glaze or how much it runs if you want them to be totally disguised. Maybe make them a little bit more emphasized and deep and open so that to adjust for the amount that will fill in. Or, you know, use a really thin glaze that won't disguise any of that work. Like for a lot of my drapery studies, I just keep them raw because it's the easiest way to keep those lines nice and crisp, especially since I've, you know, suffered over them, getting them just right.
How many, this is a trivia question. Facts about Max. At 5 pounds an object, how many pounds of clay do you go through in a week?
Oof. Man, it depends. Some weeks are pretty heavy throwing weeks. Like yesterday, I think I used 2 boxes of B-Mix or something like that. Yeah, it's tough, especially since I don't measure my clay. I really I only keep track of it in boxes.
Yeah, do you know how many boxes you've used since you've been here? Because then I could compute how many weeks and days.
Ooh, yeah, that's really tough. I've probably used at least 10 boxes in the last month or so, plus like a couple bags of reclaim. That's interesting. Maybe one of the reasons I don't measure is because I'm more comfortable not knowing. You know, facing the facts can be jarring.
But I mean, you've been extremely productive since Monday, I have to say, looking around the room, and we could do a little room tour maybe at some point, because it's all wet, so I know you've done it in the last 2-3 days.
Indeed, there's a nice thing, you know, deadlines kind of light the fire. Like this is, you know, my last day or two of any wet work, so I'm trying to make the most of it. Deadlines are good for that.
This is like a whole other show. When I walked in, I was like, he's making a second show.
It's the after show.
You really, you know, you've built up a lot of momentum, and you know, it's hard to say, okay, it's over, because usually some of the best work, at least in my experience, comes in those final hours of the show.
Exactly. When you get comfortable and when you have sort of a need to have finished work, I tend to mosey. Yeah, for like the first 2 months, I was like, oh, try some of this, try some of that, do some of the old favorites, you know, some of the standards like making the toroids. But yeah, urgency is a great motivator. That's for sure. So I'll probably just leave this as is, and I don't know, maybe work on it later, but I think I demonstrated some of those molding techniques. If you guys have any questions on these sort of techniques, feel free. Otherwise, I think we'll move on to inserts. simple inserts.
I have one question, Max. Would you curve that bottom in significantly before you're done the piece?
Yeah,
To create a foot?
like this side is way too heavy and
Okay.
that, so maybe tools are running away. So a nice way just to deal with that, again, just keeping my rib there at an angle, and like digging, just pressing it in, and then I'll do like one way around, even just
Like a 45.
45-degree angle, 45-degree hold, and then maybe as I turn it around, I can lower that angle slowly. And again, thinking about these lines in motion, like if this were a drawing, having lines going in all sorts of different directions, so there's some visual movement that draws your eye all around the piece, makes it a little more dynamic fighting.
Yes, you have one piece on your website, like the called the drape. Is this something very similar you do?
Yeah. I really like a lot of my work revolves around when surface issues, and one of the things I really like are wrinkles and wrinkling phenomena, because it's when a surface becomes a form, when something flat starts to wrinkle and buckle, it gets some dimensionality, and fabric is one of the great wrinkling, wriggling materials. So it's been a pretty consistent source of inspiration all around. I'm strongly pro wrinkle, I have to admit. So maybe I'll just do a little bit of cleanup here while I have it. So again, stiff brush. You can use whatever size you want. This one's nice and small because just to the scale of the piece. And since it's so wet, I can actually like really go for it, like draw some of these lines out and feather them, even in areas where I didn't coil them. And it's a nice, like slick, wet finish there. So that won't even need to be sponged. It's kind of nice and crisp. I'll get the slip off of the brush because that can sit in those creases and sort of soften it a little bit too much. You'll see, like, even with this, I'm losing some of the really sharp edges. Although maybe it doesn't translate like that in the video. Like the deep creases will fill with water or slip. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because they'll probably just do that anyway if I were to glaze this. So no problem. I'm gonna save the glaze symbol. Brushes, brushes are good for this. If you have a small enough sponge, sometimes like those little green scruffy, what are they called? Brillo pads are great for these sorts of things as well. Basically, just whatever will get in there, I tend to go for. You can see now my brush is pretty wet, or pretty dry rather. Sorry. It gives it kind of a different quality. You can see I can just like sculpt with this as well. Just give it another little bit of a more gentle touch than with the carving tools.
Max, for the toroids, do you glaze them all around and then put them on like cookies or stills or something like that, or?
Yeah, so the glazes that I've been working on since I've been here, I just posted one on Instagram. Those are crystalline glazes. So those glazes need to run to produce crystals. They need to be applied really thickly. And the chemistry they're overfluxed, so they are really heavy melters. And really thick glazes will melt, and heavy melters will melt. So those two variables make them really, really melty. So yeah, those that are in the gallery and the one that I just posted, I glaze them more or less all around except for the bottom, you know, eighth of the form. And then I put them on little wads. You can use stilts or anything else. Some people use like wheel thrown cylinders, but I basically make like 6 of these balls and glue them to the very bottom, and then place that toroid on a waster shelf, basically like a slab of clay that I just like really quickly hand build to get all of that running glaze.
So the balls that you make are just clay or clay and alumina?
I just use clay. You can certainly, like traditional wadding recipes are, you know, a little bit of alumina or a fair amount, just to make them more refractory. I just use clay. They're all pretty darn similar. Like this clay is pretty refractory, as is, especially at 6. So you don't have to worry about it like deforming or melting at all. High fire, like wood fire wadding, definitely has a lot more alumina in it because they go sometimes to unknown temperatures. You know, it's a cone 10 firing, but maybe the top or the front is at cone 13 and the back is at cone 8 or 9. So you just want to be careful, and that's probably why those folk go a little overboard. For safety and security. Good questions. Let me just build that area. All right, we'll switch gears. Do some.
I have a question about the bottom. Like, if you wanted the bottom to look rounded, like there was no bottom, almost like some of your bigger bulbous toroids, how would you do that on this form?
On this form, I would basically just trim it away. I probably would have built the interior with like the round, a round interior, and then trimmed the outside to match that once it was set up enough to support itself. Like for that purple piece that I've been returning to, and for all of the round pieces that I hand built, I do use more or less wheel throwing notions. Like when you throw a bowl, you need to have a thick base because you have these cantilevered walls. You need some actual support, and then you just trim that away, and then you can have your dainty feet and a nice cantilevered bowl. So I do the same thing when I coil as well. I'll be extra generous at the base, and then I'll flip it upside down once it's pretty well along in the drying process, and trim it round. And since I know the interior is round, round to the contour that I like, I just go for that contour, and the thickness is usually appropriate.
Thanks.
Good question.
Well, if we're switching gears, I'm going to propose just a 5-minute break so I can move cameras and.
Oh, I'll do the insert
over here. Okay. Okay.
But,
Do you need a break?
no problem. Maybe a halfway point.
Okay.
If we're
about there.
Oh, okay. Weird.
Do you want us to take a break? Or?
I don't know. I'll probably just keep going.
Going.
Yeah, but if anybody has any break-like questions off topic.
Max, will you show us in the glazing part how you fire on wads?
Yeah, sure thing.
Thanks.
Actually, I have a second question. Can you show us in the glazing part what, because you're grinding down those bottoms, what you consider an acceptable grind?
You would be surprised.
Oh no. This is definitely something I need to work on. I'm using an angle grinder, and it's a little sloppy. I have to say as well, heavy machinery with no depth perception, I'm fairly inaccurate and things do get a little scuffy, but things to work on. I'd love to go to a place that had a glass shop with like different levels of lapidary wheels so I could polish the bottoms of these things, but another time.
Because sometimes I'm grinding the bottom and I'm like, is someone going to look at this as a second, or is this a part of the piece?
Yes, as long as, well, I don't know, I could get defensive here. Oh, yeah, they're upright and they're bosses or they're toroids, you know, you don't have to look at the bottom, that's just a cosmetic thing. Doesn't even matter, but ideally, you know, craftsmanship is a wholesome endeavor and the piece should be perfect and lovely all around. Just like, you know, sometimes when I coil these closed forms, the inside is really messy. I do kind of think, you know, people don't see it, no harm, no foul. But yeah, it's a good theoretical question.
You know, I think it goes back to what Kayla always says, efficiencies. You know, how much time do you have to spend if no one's going to see it?
Definitely. Yeah, when is good enough, good enough? It's an interesting thing. I mean, like I'm working with this gallery in Manhattan now, and you know, there's a thing about refining where, like, the more you refine something, there are, you know, levels and preciousness and whatnot. Like if you think about Brancusi and like hand polishing these objects, that polishing is really like a loving way of working. And the more you refine something, sort of the higher it goes on those stages and levels of value.
That would be an interesting question for the gallery owner about the bottoms, just to see what their capitalistic perspective is about sales and whatnot.
I think that I had a really nice conversation with him the other day, because I've been like, yeah, I'll send you some things, like I have, you know, some pinholes, so I don't want to send that one. He was like, dude, I'm getting some red flags here. I feel like you're chasing a chimera, and you know, it's not a real thing. It'll be all chase, but at the end of the day, you know, you have to eat them. Good enough is sometimes good enough.
Yeah. Some people will say, what's a pinhole? Oh, that?
Exactly, and you know, that's kind of the endearing thing about handmade objects. Like in Islamic art, you know, thinking about like these really complex geometric mosaics, there's some rule where there has to be some imperfection. You know, they're iconophobic. You can't make the image of God. So if you have a perfect piece, it's too close to the image of God, and that's blasphemous. So you have to, you know, have a human element in it. That's a good thing to fall back on. Not a blasphemy. All right, so let's see. I have some. I made some cups the other day, the other evening, using those same dimpling and prodding and pushing techniques that I demoed in that first class. And these I'm going to keep as is, but I figured I'd do some handle demos and then show you some other ways of using handle building techniques, which, if you've seen the show or seen some of my recent Instagram posts, I've been working on these bud boss forms that are kind of these rather attenuated wheel thrown forms, some gesture and some wiggle. So I'm going to grab a lump of white clay over here.
Are you going to be working at the turntable?
Yeah, I can. So we'll just emphasize, you know, handle building or pulling handles is definitely a potter's technique, but it's really darn useful. And just like these pedal pieces that are built with a modular form, just built with an altered ball, more or less, to create a form. You can go wild with other ways of making modules, and handles could be one of them. So, and full transparency here, actually, I haven't pulled a handle probably since last October. I've been using the handle pulling technique very frequently, but I haven't pulled a functional handle in a while. So we're gonna figure this out together. And generally, when I pull handles for mugs, and I just threw this mug 3 hours ago, so it's, well, maybe 4. It's still pretty soft, especially at the bottom, but leathery enough to withstand me picking it up and shaking it around. Hopefully, just about the consistency of the ball of clay that I have over here. Get my vase out of the way.
Now, can you remind us maybe, or point out a few moments in your well-known work that basically is rooted in handle pulling?
Definitely. So, spoiler, all of these forms are made with handle pulling techniques. And essentially, like all of my alterations on other forms use a handle pulling technique. It's really tough to find distinctions because pulling a handle is essentially the same as throwing and pulling a wall, except you're pulling it with the machine spreading that pinch, which is displacing clay upward. You're spreading that mechanically around and around in a circle, so you get these nice even things. But with a piece like this, you can see the ridge there where my fingers pulled this wall and distorted it and pulled it up unevenly. So just using that pull and that displacement to your advantage. Again, the world is your oyster. It's a completely simple, fundamental technique, but you can do a boatload of things with it. And I'll demonstrate how you do that on the wheel right after this. So to make a functional handle, I'm just taking like a little nub of clay on a bigger nub of clay, enough for my hand to hold. I'll pinch out a little, make it a little smaller and extended pinching, so it's extra nub-like. Just like when I was pressing in with the sponge on the wall of that rather strange flowery piece a minute ago, there's a high resolution thing with wet clay where you get those lines where my fingers were and weren't, those indentations. And it's the very same when you use your hands on wet clay. You'll see you get the ridges like in the crease where your finger is when it's stretched like that. You know, you'll get a teeny line in between there. So those are just some nice things to exploit. You know, the glaze will break on that edge.
So Matt, with your bowl, the one that you altered slightly, do you do that while it's still on the wheel or a couple hours later?
I do that right when it's on the wheel, when it's wet. I have a piece spinning on the wheel right now that I made at like 1 o'clock or 2 hours ago. Maybe I made it at 2 o'clock. So it's still pretty wet, but I'm letting it set up just a teensy bit because it's a little larger, and you will lose some structural integrity when you squeeze and pull a form like that. So yeah, knowing how much moisture there is, if the clay is stiffer, you can get away with more, but you have to be careful. Like you may want to wet your fingers more so you don't just, when you do that motion, you don't just tear it in half, which does happen. So things to watch out for. So I'm just wetting my hand and really slowly trying to grip the clay and pull downward. Really like tapering in from the very top to create the contour. And I'm switching sides as well to keep it symmetrical because the grip that I'm using isn't symmetrical. So just to try and keep it even, I'll switch sides. Using as little water as I can, but if it ever gets dry to the touch, you know, I've gone way too far. That'll cause distortion, that'll cause it to tear or pull uneven.
Is this gonna be like a one-fingered handle?
Well, I'm not too sure. I'll probably make a couple of them and see what happens. Which is my general, like usually when I make mugs, I'll sit down and make like 20 mugs. And then when I make handles, I'll sit down and make like 30 or 40 handles. Just like playing an instrument, you know, it takes a little while to warm up. And since I haven't pulled a handle in a while, it may take me, frankly, you know, even a dozen before I have one that I like. So it's getting, you know, a little bit more thin. I'm working it gently. And I'm actually moving my thumb. Let's see. We all have these large knuckle bones. And I'm doing one pull with my thumb on the far side when I'm moving my thumb vertically to the other side. And that thumb bone is actually causing the walls to sort of curve at the edges, so they're more thin at the edges and thicker on the inside, or towards the center. Just something I like. Just makes them easier to grip and visually a little bit more interesting. Trying to keep track of the amount that I pull, so I just did like 2 pulls with my thumb that side, 2 pulls with my thumb on the other side, flipped around, do the same, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, flipping it around, 1, 2. So we're getting there. We have a handle-like object. Just do one more round. It's getting a little thin. Frankly, it's getting a little wet. You know, I've added a fair amount of water to this, and if I keep doing that, it'll get weaker and weaker and more delicate. And if I make a wrong move, all will be lost. I'm gonna track down a clean knife tool, some variety. I had a needle tool. What is this one? So for my handles, there are a couple ways of making handles. Some people attach a nub of clay to the side of a mug and then they pull directly off the mug. Frankly, I've never had much success doing that. So I just make them separately and let them dry. I'm just gonna cut the very bottom of this. You can see that it's a little messy. There's a little fold there where the clay had an edge to begin with. So I'm just gonna slice that very edge at a 45-degree angle. Try not to slice my finger on this reel. And then I'll slice it again at a 45-degree angle, you know, at a straight edge, but now the end of this handle in this orientation is set up for a 45-degree. I actually wouldn't really recommend using metal rib. It's just the first thing I've done. So now we have a decent handle. I'm not entirely sure if it's appropriate for such a piece, so I'll just sketch that out. Not too bad, it's a little small. You can play around with how it fits. And this mug form, you know, tapers out. It's definitely heavier on the bottom. So I like to have my hand closer to where all the weight is. So I would probably put this handle towards the bottom rather than at the top. Ooh, awesome. So weird. That's perfect. Something like that. This handle is a little bit too wet, so I'll just leave that off to the side and make another one. But again, this is basically the same technique I've been, you know, just slowly, gently working wet clay, like pushing it in a direction. Just doing that with a little coil. So I'm gonna smooth out the bottom of this so that I don't get one of those open edges. Again, just like slowly working out a little nub. Try and really work on that top area at first, so it's not a cone, but it actually kind of looks like a rectangle. So at the beginning, when there's tons of clay, you know, you can use a lot of water and get away with it because it has enough strength, and the water won't weaken it a tremendous amount. I'm going to make this one a little bit more quickly and aggressively, so you can get a feel for how, you know, those finger marks get left in. It's interesting. It's kind of against the way I usually do these things. This is a little thin for such a thing. Whoop, oh no. So I squeezed too much, and you'll see there's a little too much of a dip in there. Or it's a little bit thin right there, because as I pulled, I stopped, and then I pulled that instead of stretching it, and it pulled and weakened that area. So frankly, if I do that again, it'll probably, you know, eventually tear off. But that kind of leads in to that first image that I had showed you of the fancy, I don't know, like Sev teapot. You can keep these extra little bits and attach them as secondary handle appendages. Like if you look at that teapot that I posted in the Facebook group, it's kind of a double handle. It's kind of a triple handle, frankly, but 2 is plenty. And frankly, I'd love to see a bigger database of fancy teacups because they have outrageous handles. And I never, well, I see people working with things like that. Just to give you an idea of how to use something of that sort. These are sloppy and not really well calibrated. You can, you know, use that cut off end and create an extra finger hold with there. You know, it'll hook right in a little bit easier. Kind of a fun way to engineer a handle. If you look at that Josh Deweese photo that I posted as well, he's really building with handles to a kind of outrageous extent, you know, doubling the height of the vase he's working with adding 6 handles and then adding handles to his handles and creating these weird bridges, really having fun with it. Again, going back to that petal work, you know, you can build with handles. So I just marked those out. If you guys want, I can show you, you know, how I would actually attach a handle. I'd probably let this set up for, well, maybe I'll just do that. I'll let this handle set up for half an hour or 20 minutes. It's a little bit too wet right now. It'll deform pretty easily, but also mar you know, all those wet bits. You'll get that tacky sort of feeling, and it'll pull up some clay and be a little too dirty. So if you just put that aside and let it stiffen up for a while. So that's handle pulling and a little bit of form pulling. But now we'll go to the wheel and do wheel form pulling.
I think I'll kind of keep the paradigm and do the overhead with this, and then I'll just move that in front on the stool.
Cool, no problem. All right, let's see, any questions? We're gonna get ourselves oriented here. 2 o'clock, so maybe 2 hours ago, I threw this tall, skinny vase-like form, and it's setting up, but it's still, you know, I can squish it pretty easily if I wanted to.
And how wide, how thick are the walls?
Good question. The rim is slightly thicker,
Okay.
about yay, and then right below that, it's pretty darn thin. The bottom, I'm not a great thrower. Like the base is pretty thick compared to up here at the middle. And frankly, that's going to be useful. As I pull this in a moment, it'll concentrate more clay. It'll get thicker, where there'll be more weight up top. And I really do want to have that base heavier so that when the vase gets, you know, at least gains another third in height, that the base will be able to support it without it falling over either right now or later on in the firing or after the firing as well. I've had a couple of these that, you know, really lean, even though they do stand up, which is kind of nice, but it does make people nervous as well. So I'm just going to wet this whole thing. Again, it's really just like having that handle. You want just enough water. And at the beginning, you know, I can use a fair amount. I'm actually going to try and do this fairly quickly so that I don't get it waterlogged and have it lose its strength. But since this is big compared to that handle, I'm going to be using my whole hand, both my hands, if I can. Similar to when you collar something on the wheel and you like go in and squeeze and sort of taper it in. But I'm going to just go straight up. Do another pass, straight up. Just turn it a little bit. I'm just, you know, it's getting a little distorted. It's gained some height. I'm going to really try and get that bottom. I'll try and squeeze. Each of these, like this technique is really still pretty fresh for me, so I'm still frankly figuring it out myself. So I'm getting some nice lines, and it's starting to bow in on this side, which I kind of like, and bow out on the other. So maybe I'll try and chase that and curve it. Curve my hands as I bring it up.
That's like you lift the walls when it was pretty wide, and then you like use the technique you're showing to make it more skinny.
Yeah. Basically, it gets skinnier and it'll get some height as well. Just
Then you left it at a stage where you were like lifting the walls by traditional like way. How wide and how tall was it?
I probably should have measured it. Like right now, I probably only gained maybe an inch or two. We'll see. See if I can get some more. And now you can see the top, like where it's buckled in right there. That's where my rim starts to be more thick, and right there is where it's thin. So it's sort of collapsing in on itself a teensy bit. Again, just trying to keep my hands wet. I'll try and do the pulls all the way up. We are losing some volume on the inside, but that's okay. So frankly, like if I were to do this again, I probably would keep the top just as thin. I don't really like how it's flaring out at the top where it's thicker and can support itself. I'm gonna try and taper it back in, just doing that same collaring right at the top. I'm not too worried, you know, the edge, that top edge has kind of pringled in on itself, but I'll fix that later on, I'm not too worried. And just like with that handle pulling, you can get a fair amount of growth. Like now we've probably gained 4 inches. But I suspect I'll be losing my integrity pretty soon. So I'm sort of stopping pulling from the total bottom. And if I do another pull right now, it's going to fold over. So I'm going to be careful and make sure it's on center. Again, ceramics does really well under pressure. So if this is straight and centered, I can keep going for a long time. But if it gets out of whack, it's too stressful. It won't be able to support itself. It's just being extra careful. I have to mention, Kayla and I did a blind throwing contest the other day for a gala event in the fall or in August. And the challenge was who can throw the tallest cylinder blindfolded, which I have to admit is kind of unfair because I've been partially blindfolded for some months now. But
yeah, he pulled this out of his hat, this technique.
It wasn't, yeah, there was no discussion of volume or anything, just tallest. So.
But now that I think of it, it was a throwing contest, not a pulling.
Oh,
throwing and pulling.
Throwing is pulling. It's just with the wheel on. I don't know.
Maybe he will be disqualified.
Oh, please. There's a conspiracy out there working against.
But I was the winner up until Max sat down at the wheel, and I think mine was 9.5 inches, and his was 19.
Wow.
With 5 pounds of clay.
Yeah, no, 3 minutes and 5 pounds of clay. Yeah, that was fun. So I just fixed that edge. I don't know if you could see, but it had warped and pringled in just because the top was really thin and weak. So when I did a pull, it buckled. But I just fixed that with a fingertip of water and just like from that one first demo where I foliated a rim, just like slowly working that out, moving my finger back and forth with a little bit of pressure and some support underneath and pulling that out. For the record, Kayla also knocked my piece over, taking off my blindfold in a clear act of sabotage. Who's going to be disqualified? So that, I mean, like, that's the technique. You can do that as you will. One thing I really do like about this form is you get those like gestural lines where a pull is remained. So I'm not sure if it's translating. Let's see if there's a better lighting. But there are some grooves where like my fingers were, or maybe where the heel of my hand was, that push in and bring a line all the way up. And they turn and swivel, and I like those delicate moments. And this, you know, I don't know, the top I left too thick, frankly. So I'm just gonna go take both of my fingers and pull just manually on the top, stretching it out and trying to thin it out. And I'm gonna try and fold it fold it all the way over. That'll give this piece some directionality. It's almost Cobra-like. And just bellying that lip down. So now it really has a face. I'll try and keep stretching it. Again, just supporting. I have my one hand on the outside and my other hand I'm just pulling, stretching, pressing up against that clay, and it's displacing clay and getting some more height. My outside hand is also working as a mold. So I'm molding that curve on the roundness of my index finger. So I want it to be like open, unfurled, and inviting. A little heavy-handed. Let's get a little, started to get a little too curved in the form. Just did another pass. You do have to watch these. Sometimes I'll come back after 30 seconds and they'll be listing to one side. You gotta be careful. Make sure they're centered and self-supporting. I think I'm gonna call that good. So that's handle pulling forms. Cool. I think that's the only wheel operation. I'll demo the wheel thrown inserts now on pre-made forms. Although, if we have time, I can throw one of those round forms.
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
Go for it.
All right, let's do it. Thanks, guys. Let's see. All right, stage one, getting something like this off. So the wheel head is very wet. There's a ton of water. I'll just add some more. There's a ton of water there. When I pull, it's going to push a little bit of water underneath, and that'll allow me to hydroplane this off the side of the wheel. Maybe I'll do another pass just to make sure. Oh, there we go. These are exciting. They're fun. They always surprise me. So I tend to just get things right to the edge of the wheel so I can slip a finger underneath. And I'll just drop it. All right. And I'll keep my one eye on that. All right, bear with me. I'm going to do some wedging. Frankly, I'm a terrible wedger, so not much to show there. But if there are any questions in the interim, let them rip.
I'll just give them a little tour of some stuff we've got going on here.
I love that sculpture right behind the piece you just picked up.
Oh, that round one? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Really nice.
That's fun. It's tough. I have not too much time left, so I'll probably get into a bit of a frenzy. Like things like that, I'm not entirely sure how to surface. If it had larger grog or if I had more time and material, I probably would spray it in plastic. But at this point, I'll probably just do some experimental glazing on it. And
It's kind of nice in terracotta too.
yeah, oh man, honestly, it's the nicest thing about terracotta. You can always just leave it be. All
Do you face all your pots in this direction? So you, when you walk in the room, they greet you with smiles and shrugs and all that kind of thing?
Their little faces.
Linda Sikora accused me of having a highly pedestrian studio space. There was kind of a quality where like I would set things up so that when people walked by, they would be engaging in a kind of way. So that may be.
The one that Kayla just passed by has a lot of character.
I just want to show everyone a little glimpse out our window. We found someone to take away our old alpine kiln, so you can see he's on the forklift and he's moving the kiln. He got it out of the shed and now he's moving it, I think, onto the trailer or actually into the back of his truck. So we're really excited to get rid of that old thing.
There's gonna be so much space in there. That's no small task too. It's basically exactly the size of the door.
Yeah, so we're really excited. He's taking the old soda kiln too.
Wow.
So we'll be ready to build one before you know it.
So Kayla, what are you putting in the spot where that alpine was located?
We don't have any plans yet. Hoping eventually to replace it with another kiln, or maybe it's a electric kiln where the whole body lifts up, so you can load large pieces into the kiln. It's making me nervous. Or a smaller gas kiln.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good options.
Or something else completely, like I don't really know what we need, but photo booths could work there for now. It's not very clean in there, but it's dark and it's the perfect amount of space.
Well, I'll just get it. Again, for centering and adding things generally, a nice round base is nice. It'll decrease the possibility. Of air bubbles when you slam down a big chunk of clay. Because it'll even out as you hit it. So again, just making sure there's not water on the wheelhead, because that will make this nice ball of clay hydroplane off. You want a teensy bit of water. This is already damp, so that's enough to really glue them on. I try to do as much slapping as I can to get it somewhat on center. It just saves a lot of labor. So I'll just go around and and the first thing I'm going to throw is going to be an inverted cone like this. So you can see just a simple form. And that's what gets placed inside the spherical form. So I'll start with one of those. Lots of water while we're centering, lots of clay. You want it to be as liquidated as possible. Do one round up and one round down. I'll do another round up. You don't need very much clay at all for that for that insert. So I'm just opening it up. And since that insert is totally hollow, there's no floor, I'll open it up pretty generously. It's just a little thick cylinder. I'm squeezing it from all sides, you know, coning it in. I'll do a single pull. I do want to keep in mind that since the other form is going to be pretty thick, I want to think about that and keep this these walls fairly thick as well, just so they don't dry very differently or shrink very differently. Especially at the top edge. I want the top edge to be pretty darn thick because that's where I'll be attaching. So then I'm just collaring in from the outside, trying to taper, take a cylinder like this and really taper that bottom edge so that you get that nice curve.
Can you describe collaring?
Collaring, you either you squeeze from the outside and push inwards to keep a cylinder directed in. And to do that, you either use 2 points of contact, 3 points of contact, or 4 points of contact, just to keep the pressure even, so that with even pressure, you won't get any distortion. It evens itself out, I guess, and moves in the direction you like. I'll have to work on articulating that. But so you can see I have my thumbs here and then my index fingers there. So I'm just using a little triangle. And I'll switch to using these parts of the inner part of my index finger and my thumb and my other index finger, just depending on the size. When it gets fairly thick, fairly small, it's harder to use my whole hand accurately. Now I'm actually collaring with this whole side of my hand and my other fingers as well. I'm gonna just do another pull on this exterior shoulder to get more of an angle that I like. And then just pushing from the top to flare that edge out until it's more or less horizontal. I'll do another collaring pull. I'll collar down. You can throw down as well. It's no problem. And just fix that contour as well. Another really gentle pull. I'm really not moving too much clay. Just trying to get the contour how I'd like. I want this one to be like pretty tight. I'm gonna do another pull in and another pull down. You don't have to do either direction. I'm just lazy, so when I do a pull up, it's easiest just to go right back down. And that's about it. I'm gonna section off that area with my thumb. Maybe another deeper indent there. My wire as such. Just gently pull that wire off. And voila. As you can see, you know, it's pretty darn thick, so it's not warping or wiggling. Then that's great. That's what I want. All right, what do we have, 10 minutes? Let's see. Yeah. All right, we will get to it all. Simple cylindrical forms. Again, like a bowl, since there is going to be a fair amount of cantilevering or extension, I'll leave the base fairly thick so that it can support itself. I'll trim it down later on. So I use like a really fast wheel speed and move my hands kind of gently. As always, there's no shortage of great Italian sayings. One that I think of is "un mano di ferro in un guanto di velluto." which means I have an iron hand in a velvet glove. You know, being firm and assertive, but gentle as well.
Is that B-Mix, Max?
This is, yeah, this is just the old standard B-Mix.
Thanks.
Easy to throw, fairly light, smooth. For my purposes at the moment, that's what I want. So I'm just, you know, opened out. I left at least an inch, maybe an inch and a half at the bottom. And now I'm opening it a little more, working on that floor area. And the floor is going to be lightly curved as well. And I'll just remember that curve when I do my trimming. So I have an interior. Let's work it a little more. Then I'll collar in again. So now I'm using 2 points of contact for my collaring, just on either side. I'll do one more. And then I'll go all the way up with 4 points, basically each of my palms and then the tips of my finger. And as I get to the top, I'll compress it down as well. And make sure there's enough water on the inside. I'm going to start gently curving this outward, bellying it out at the center, and then collaring or pushing it in at the top, so it's, you know, slightly round. But I do want to keep that top inward so that it doesn't try and flare out. Since this will be a closed form, and I do have a certain diameter of insert to work with, I want to keep it in that range. Pretty thick, so I can be, you know, generous with water. I really don't want to have any standing water though. I don't want the bottom to be full of water or have any sitting water there at all. Just making another pull, switching my position and get in. Some water on the bottom, so I'll retrieve that. Do like a scouting with my finger, see if there are any dry spots. If there are, I'll give it another dosage, couple droplets. A few more. Another pull. Usually right from the bottom there. And I modulate my speed based on the thickness of the clay as well. So it was pretty thick there. So I just slowed down and used the same amount of pressure to displace that section. I'll do another pull just from the top there. So that's round-like. And then, let's see. Sometimes I throw with 2 ribs. I find it's kind of nice to work on the floor angle right there with a sponge on the inside. Because you don't have to worry as much about the angle of the rib. You can kind of get away with a lot more with the sponge. So I'm going to try and belly out that bottom curve with the rib on the outside and the sponge on the inside. See, like I carved away a fair amount of clay with the sharp side of the rib there. It's another nice expedient thing, and it's nice and compressed there and centered, so it'll be supporting itself.
So you actually were moving the sponge inside in a spherical thing, but not moving the rib?
Basically, yeah, keeping the rib in the same spot and working that bottom
Thank you.
working that bottom edge with the sponge. Probably did like 2 or 3 pulls nice and slowly. And now make sure there's enough lubrication on the sponge. I'll get back to the wall and do one more finishing pull. One thing that's both good and bad about the crystalline glazes is that they show everything. So even these very faint rib lines and especially deep finger lines will show up very dramatically with the crystalline glaze. Since it runs a lot, it thins out a fair amount, and a thin glass will not only reveal but really highlight all of the texture and marks that are left there. So I want this to be as smooth as possible, although I will go back and sand it down afterwards or scrape it down as needed. Cool. Well, that's something round. Yeah. Probably do one more pull just at the very top to get an extra inch of close it off. Oops, excuse me, just a little more so that it fits the diameter of that insert. Although frankly, yeah, I usually make a bunch of inserts, so I have enough to play around. Just slowly taking it in.
That's almost horizontal, that upper part. And I find that when I try to do that, it usually capes down. Any ideas?
Definitely. When you do your pulls, be really careful about, this is like, if I'm probably going to stop. I won't demonstrate what I'm doing because it will collapse if I mess around with it anymore. Things to think about are the thickness as well. If you have a nice, a little bit of a thicker shoulder and it tapers and gets more thin, that will help support it. Also, just having it really well centered, because spheres are very strong, but if it gets off center at all, then the structural integrity is completely thrown off and it'll distort really quickly. So to keep it really on center, move really slowly and deliberately. Like I was saying, the thickness, be mindful of that as you pull. You can be a little bit more aggressive bit by bit as you work up, so that it stays thicker down on the side and slowly thins out. It doesn't have to be dramatic, it doesn't have to be paper thin on the top and real chunky on the side. Even just a teensy little taper will give you more structure. Throwing horizontal is, yeah, real it is a challenge. Like the woman who I worked for in New Jersey, Toshiko Takezu, she makes a ton of closed forms. So her forms basically go all the way to the center and then they end in like this little teensy cone. So she is a master at that, like having these big horizontal swaths and then coning in and tearing off the top. I'll post more of her work. She was a tremendous thrower. Really
I like to think of these toroids of yours as part of that lineage. It's really cool.
I would be very grateful for that.
Because it's sort of like, it's the tops. Yeah, cool. Well.
I think she was part of my service in the case notes.
We're at 5 o'clock. Was there anything else to do today?
I can, if I'll probably just attach, do the final insert move. So I've just demoed how I make insert. If you want to stick around, you're welcome to check that out. It is our closing time, so I shan't judge anyone who takes off.
Will you be working on the banding wheel?
Unfortunately.
My phone, which is the overhead camera, is so if that dies, we'll just go to the iPad.
This won't take too long. Theoretically, just a couple minutes, but feel free ask questions as you need. These are
I'm really
basically,
glad-
pretty much.
I'm really glad we watched you throw that. Yeah,
That's terrific.
that was really
Yeah,
helpful.
thank you.
Teaching throwing is really tough. Definitely the best way to do it is just like practice, 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 and your hands will know what to do, and they'll be able to respond way quicker than you'll be able to think about what needs to be done.
And I think practicing with the same clay.
Ooh, yeah, it's amazing how slight changes in clay body will really throw you off, so to speak.
But even things that you take for granted, like for example, when you started to bend that top, you may take that for granted, but actually I wouldn't have started bending that until much later in the pooling. So
oh yeah,
seeing you doing that was a tremendous help.
Yeah.
It's really liberating throwing things that aren't going to be picked up, because you can keep it really thick and just think about the form. Be sloppy, but make the form you want. I think people sometimes with like all these processes get too caught up in like refining things at all stages, and the final form lacks. Just like make something really dirty and then clean it up, but have something. You can't clean up something that's clean. Does that make sense? So I have this fairly centered thing. I'm actually just gonna like smack one side and sort of dip it down, just because round things are nice, but they don't have to be symmetrical. Nice off round thing. So I have a couple inserts laying around, so I'm just going to see which one kind of fits better. And you'll see, again, like with my coiling, I have just the outside rim completely wrapped, so that this is where a lot of the joining happens, and I want to keep that wet. I'm not sure if you guys saw that, but I also have this edge wrapped. Since these are simple forms, I do tend to sit down and throw a number of them at a time. This one's not too shabby.
Are you looking for a certain amount of overlap?
Certain amount of overlap, yeah, exactly. And I'm going to distort them a little bit, so I want even a little bit more, just the right amount, just like Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold. Here's the bottom side, that was sliced off the wheel. Not that you can really see that from the top, but I like to just take my thumb and spin this around and flare that bottom edge out just a little bit, so it's a smooth transition from material to darkness when you look in. Just slowly working that out. Not a tremendous amount. Just giving it just so it's not an abrupt ending. Maybe I'll do another angle, actually closer to a 45-degree, just at the edge. And then, since again, this area is going to be supporting all this weight, I do have some excess clay towards the bottom half, bottom third. We'll just trim a teensy bit of that off. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be accurate. We'll just get a little bit of that weight off. If it's too heavy, it can lead to some issues. The top can crack in the firing, very rarely in the drying, especially since these are stiff enough to support that. But since this is a fair amount of space, a fair amount of clay, I may as well just make it easier easier for the clay. Take some of that beef. All right, make sure there are no terrible edges visible. And then I'll take my trusty serrated rib, not the one I was using for terracotta, but clean porcelaneous rib. I'll curve this edge, I think about a 45-degree angle, but probably just an approximation. I want there to be a gentle join rather than like that. I want it to be like this. So just going around and
Like a half-inch overlap or an inch?
Yeah, it's so tough. I'm not too worried. I prefer to have more than less. More is easier. I can just trim it right off. Less, it's much harder to add it in and keep it kind of integrated properly. You can see I'm getting that bevel decently, less so here, but it's kind of naturally done since I did that squish. And then just because it's the tool I have in my hand and it's sharp and it'll do the job, just go around and lacerate this. This is, one of those times where I do my scratching and attaching like a proper ceramics.
And you're doing this because it's giving you a greater scoring effect than just using the teeth regularly.
Right. Yeah. Getting a deeper cut. And there's still, it's a, a very fine cut. Moisture will travel in there and liquefy it properly. And I'll do the same thing on the other side of my insert here. I'll just like plop that in so you can kind of see what's going on. So it's not quite attached there, or it doesn't quite fit since there's that distortion. So I'm going to take this edge and just sort of gently pull it down. So we have a little bit of that. It's kind of lacking some clay, or it's thin right at the very edge. It's a little bit thin right there. That's a stress point. That's a hard angle. I don't like that. Round things are strong. Nice curves are strong. So I'm just going to take a little ball of clay, stuff it right in the center there, blend it in.
Good call. Some prevention going on. That's awesome.
Definitely. And just like
buttress.
that was just a teensy distortion. And now it fits in. Whoops, so it fits in a little bit better. I'm going to squeeze from both sides that are opposite of the divot so that it naturally sort of tuckers in right there. And that is about where I'd like. Sorry, what were we going to say, Gail? Whoop. I'm going to do the same thing, just like gently cut into this. Yeah, you can use knives, you can use all sorts of things. I find that this creates channels for the moisture to dig into without causing any, like I'm not digging far enough in that it would split at any of these points. Again, it's a nice thing using slightly thicker walls, a little bit more space, room to move. I use vinegar for these attachments. We're going to talk more about flocculants and deflocculants, so I'll just say vinegar is great. Good for cooking, good for cleaning, good for attaching stuff. Very cheap. Smells interesting as well. Get your bang for your buck. I'm just using white vinegar. You can use rice vinegar. You can use whatever type of vinegar you have. Apple cider vinegar, and so forth. And I'm just taking some and getting this nice wet. I have to admit, I would probably have preferred to attach these maybe even an hour ago or 2 hours ago. They're a little bit too stiff for my liking. This is where, you know, the minutia of water control gets really annoying, frankly. It's really important. You know, like the difference of an hour could mean that this piece will crack in the drying.
Are you gonna do anything different at this stage to accommodate that dryness?
Keep my fingers crossed. Frankly, yeah. I mean, maybe I'll keep it covered. You'll see, like when I do my blending, that's not too bad. So just making sure that's basically in line. Actually, before I attach it, I may just pinch out the very final edge, just a teensy bit, because I'll be blending that down anyway. This will give me some extra diameter as well. And since they're a little bit more stiff, perhaps even one side more than the other, this, I think this is more dry than this. That just opens it up. And when I blend this area, it won't push down on that as much because it's more thin. And now that I've broken it up, it's a little softer as well because the smooth clays crust over a little bit more. So like the top, just the top coat.
You don't put any slip in between?
No slip. Vinegar is really all you need. The vinegar will create slip on its own. So now I'm just going and trying to get rid of those edges and compress it. You know, ideally I could get on the inside and like compress the bottom edge, but since I can't, I really want to be careful that they are meeting each other, that they're not just resting on the edge, but that they're snug. So to do that, I'll just go around once with my finger, do the heavy lifting, and then I will attack this with a rib. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to think about slip versus vinegar versus water. They all work, you know. I've just gotten, frankly, it's kind of annoying to keep track of slips. Like they'll dry up and then it's hard to wet them down again without them being chunky. And that's a big pain. I do have a really messy wheel, so I could go over there and, you know, scoop a little bit of slip. But I found just vinegar is all you need because it does produce slip. It'll liquefy those areas that again, just using my thumb and like smoothing. It's pretty rough right now, but it's getting there. I'm getting rid of all those edges, so they're forgetting that they're two things, and they're.
Do you do any distortion of the overall form anymore once the top is on there?
Almost never. I like the sort of gentle divot that I have going. I feel like if I squished like that, it would upset the opposite join, especially since it's stiff. And while they're remembering or forgetting that they're two things, if I squished it, they would probably remember pretty quick.
Yeah.
Good question. Yeah.
So whatever you did, like after it comes off the wheel before the top goes in, that's what you're working with.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, and I like the, you know, this is pretty darn round and centered, but just throwing it off a little bit, I kind of like, you know, well, this one is pretty centered.
Pretty couple.
Yeah, it gives it a, I don't know, some je ne sais quoi. And now I'll just take my trusty metal rib. I'll try and work those edges more. This is also compressing it down again, so those two slippy edges will meet each other, and it's wearing off all those lumpy, terrible bumps that I left with my fingertips. It's really a constant refining thing. All right, this is basically it. I'll open up the floor for any final questions. I'm sorry, we did run over time here.
Oh, no. It was
No,
worth it.
I'm really appreciative. Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Max.
I'll be doing this for the next 2 hours.
And just to show you guys, like, here's one that he's already done that too.
That one's pretty darn centered. I may have pushed down a teeny bit, a slight proportion.
There's a big one.
So Max, you never create a cone that goes all the way down to the bottom for support, do you?
I have, especially with the hand-built ones. Sometimes I build them simultaneously. Like with a form like this, I'll be building the external wall, and then I'll build an internal wall.
Okay.
And that's a really fun way of working. And then, you figure out a way to create bridges between the interior wall and exterior. With the throne ones, I don't so much. The tortoise is actually one of the strongest forms. Like spheres and tortoises are really self-supporting. That's why they're found in nature kind of to a staggering degree.
These are like urchins.
Yeah. No, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. So usually I don't need it for support, although frankly I do have a decent failure rate. So I probably shouldn't say.
Okay, let me feel better then. What's your failure rate?
Tremendous majority.
No, come on.
Really? Oh my goodness. No,
Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah. Caleb, I don't know, really.
Yeah, mine's like 60%.
It's
Wow.
It's a dream that everything works out. That's why I make so much stuff, because most of it goes in the trash.
At what stage? At the stage of the bisting or the glazing or what?
I'd say, yeah, I probably have maybe a 60% survival rate through the firing, but only like with these pieces, probably only a 10% decency rate. Well, not decent, but like keep like this. The glaze actually works out, and there are no little cracks, and there's no pinholing, and there's no nonsense. So the rate of my the pieces that I actually keep is really low. Dramatic failures.
Hold on. Can you guys hear him right now?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Oh, that worked.
Cool. The phone sounds.
Actually, it's just saying low battery still, but we'll just keep the mic on, and I'm gonna you're on this one now.
But yeah, please feel better, Ruth. Failure is the name of the game, that's for sure.
And then also part of your process is reglazing. Like a significant part of your process is firing multiple times.
Definitely. If something comes out and I don't like it, I like working with a variety of glazes, some that are really thick and pasty. So if something comes out and I really don't like it, I'll just completely transform it, like an inch layer of some of these glazes. These crystalline glazes can be refired. Some of these forms, like the tortoises especially, firing them multiple times sometimes leads to them just cracking really dramatically. But you may as well do that if you didn't like it anyway. If it was going to go in the trash heap, you may as well roll the dice. Because sometimes those refires come out fantastic.
And you fire mainly cone 6, you said?
Up and down, yeah. For a long time, I did only cone 10. I did a lot of salt firing. It's so much work, and it's such a pain, and you have to wait a while for things to cool. And I don't know. I've just been working on smaller and smaller forms and taking almost my whole palette down to cone 6. It's a lot easier and suits my level and my taste. I can load stuff in the evening and then get it out the following evening. and get results.
Did all of it. We're just,
We're running overtime. All right, yeah, honestly,
this is gonna die.
oh, there we go. We're, external forces are impinging. Feel free, I hope you guys are all in the Facebook group, but if you're not, like the Sonoma Ceramics page. The class page is a branch of that page, of the Sonoma Ceramics page. But yeah, feel free to post other questions, your own projects, progress. I posted a couple of videos as well.
Yeah.
The Takeshi Yasuda documentary is awesome. If you want to see like a glimpse of what Chinese industry they were doing, man. Like there's one of them making those 18-foot porcelain tiles by hand, you know, just a bunch of guys smoking cigarettes and rolling a pipe on this. It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Go check those out. There's also a Yixing video. It's frankly very intimidating. If any of you guys have ever worked with slabs, it's kind of horrifying how precise and delicate and nuanced they can make this.
Max, can you also post like a video, either yours or somebody's, like throwing tall cylinder, like before the part where you started like coloring it today?
Wait, I'm sorry. Talks, videos myself or other people.
Like either yours or somebody else's, like the throwing tall cylinders before the point where you started today, like how to get it up to that point. Like it was almost like the opening was pretty narrow in what you showed when you started out.
I'll see if I can track down a reliable video, or maybe we could cover that in the next class. Because cylinders, again, are really the name of the game. You know, even these round forms are cylinders. They're just round. So yeah, being able to make a nice tall cylinder is certainly fundamental. I'll see if I know of any people who have good descriptive videos.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you're not doing anything Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, I'll do an artist talk on the Sonoma Ceramics happy hour. So I'm the featured artist this week, and I'll be talking about working, you know, my path in clay for the past 20 years and working in Jingdezhen, China last summer, and a little bit about the classes I'll be teaching as well. So join us if you can.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.